My wife said she was going to a boring family reunion in Denver. But then I saw her aunt's post. A lavish birthday beach party. With my wife in a white gown. Her family raised champagne, laughing, while I sat 90 miles away uninvited. So I posted one photo. And their perfect night shattered. You know those mornings that feel like they're straight out of a Folgers commercial? Sun streaming through the kitchen windows at that perfect angle that doesn't burn your retinas. Birds doing their little chirping routine like they're auditioning for a Disney movie. And the smell of fresh coffee filling the air with promises of productivity and adulting success. Yeah, that was my Friday morning. And let me tell you, it was the most beautifully orchestrated lie I'd ever lived through without even knowing it. I was standing in our kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, because I'm too lazy to wear slippers like a normal person, cradling my favorite mug that says, "World's okayest husband." A gag gift from Harper that felt a little too on the nose now that I think about it. The coffee was black, bitter, and strong enough to jumpstart a dead car battery. Exactly how I like it. Meanwhile, Harper was doing this humming thing she does when she's in a good mood, bopping around the kitchen island like she was starring in her own music video. And I was just the backup dancer who didn't know the choreography. She looked gorgeous, naturally, because Harper doesn't do casual Friday like normal humans. Even her, "I'm just throwing something on," outfits looked like they required a Pinterest board and a consultation with 3 fashion bloggers. She had on these high-waisted jeans that probably cost more than my car payment, a white linen shirt that screamed, "I summer in the Hamptons," even though we've never been anywhere fancier than a Holiday Inn Express. And her hair was doing that effortlessly wavy thing that I know for a fact takes 45 minutes and 17 different products to achieve. "So, babe," she said, grabbing her phone and checking her reflection in the black screen for the 1000th time. "I'm heading out in like 10 minutes. You're going to be okay holding down the fort this weekend, right?" I took another sip of coffee and nodded, because what else was I supposed to say? "No. Honey, please don't leave me alone with my thoughts and our neurotic golden retriever who thinks the mailman is a serial killer." "Yeah, totally. You have fun at the reunion. Tell your mom I said hi." Harper's smile did this weird flickery thing, like a light bulb that's about to burn out, but she recovered quick. "Oh, you know my family. It's just going to be super boring, babe. Like, painfully boring. Uncle Richard talking about his boat that he'll never actually buy. Aunt Lydia showing everyone her vacation photos on her iPad for 3 hours straight. My dad complaining about the stock market. You'd absolutely hate it." Now here's the thing. Harper's family, the Langfords of Denver, Colorado, are about as boring as a Real Housewives reunion special. These people coordinate their outfits for trips to Whole Foods. They have a family group chat dedicated entirely to discussing which brand of sparkling water has the most refined bubble-to-flavor ratio. Diane, Harper's mom, once spent an entire Thanksgiving dinner explaining her color-coded filing system for holiday cards. Boring? Sure, if your definition of boring includes enough passive-aggressive energy to power a small city and more judgment than a Supreme Court hearing. But I'm a good husband, or at least I was trying to be, so I just smiled and said, "Yeah, you're probably right. I'll just hang here, catch up on some shows, maybe reorganize the garage like I've been promising to do since we moved in 2 years ago." Perfect. Harper practically bounced over to me, her coconut lotion smell hitting me before she did, and planted a kiss on my cheek. It was quick, perfunctory, the kind of kiss you give someone when you're already mentally checked out and halfway out the door. "You're the best. I'll text you when I get there, okay?" She grabbed her suitcase. And okay, let's talk about this suitcase for a second. This thing was huge. Like, I'm moving to a foreign country and never coming back huge. For a weekend family reunion in Denver, a city that's a 2-hour drive away. She could have thrown some stuff in a duffel bag and called it a day. But no, Harper had packed like she was preparing for a 3-week expedition through the Amazon. I should have known something was up right then. But hindsight is 20/20, and I was still operating on the assumption that my wife wasn't a world-class liar. "Drive safe," I called after her as she wheeled that monstrosity toward the front door, the sound of it rolling across our hardwood floors like thunder in the distance. "Always do," she sang back, and then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her with this finality that I didn't understand yet. I stood there in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, listening to her car start up in the driveway and pull away. Our golden retriever, Biscuit. Yes, we named our dog Biscuit because Harper thought it was adorable, patted over, and sat at my feet, looking up at me with those big brown eyes that either meant, I love you, or I need to pee immediately. Looks like it's just you and me this weekend, buddy, I said, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. He wagged his tail, completely oblivious to the fact that his other human had just lied through her perfectly whitened teeth and abandoned us for what I would later discover was the social event of the season. I finished my coffee, rinsed out the mug, and looked around our kitchen. Everything was perfectly in place, from the succulents on the windowsill that Harper obsessively watered, and that I secretly thought were plastic for the first month we had them, to the chalkboard on the wall that still said, "Love you," in her swirly handwriting from 3 days ago. It all looked so normal, so domestic, so much like the life we'd built together over the past 5 years. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly known while I was standing there in my pajama pants planning my weekend of Netflix and ignoring household chores, was that I'd just become the invisible man of my own marriage. I wasn't a partner. I wasn't even a supporting character. I was the guy who didn't make the cut, the person who didn't fit the aesthetic, the husband who was perfectly fine to have around when it was convenient, but not good enough to bring to the party. But that realization was still hours away. In that moment, I was just a guy in his kitchen, thinking his wife was off to a boring family reunion, completely unaware that boring was the biggest lie she'd ever told me, and that coconut lotion smell she'd left behind was basically the scent of betrayal in tropical form. Spoiler alert, I was about to get a master class in humiliation, and I didn't even know I was enrolled. Let me take you back to the beginning, back when I still had hope and dignity and thought that loving someone meant their family would eventually tolerate you. Spoiler alert, I was an idiot. I met Harper's family 3 years ago, about 6 months after we started dating, and I walked into that meeting with the kind of naive optimism usually reserved for people who think they can change their oil without watching a YouTube tutorial first. Harper had been hyping up this dinner for weeks, telling me how excited her parents were to meet me, how her brother Connor was really looking forward to getting to know me, how it was all going to be so chill and casual. She used the word casual approximately 47 times, which should have been my first red flag, because nothing the Langfords do is casual unless your definition of casual includes place settings that require a manual and wine pairings that need their own PowerPoint presentation. The Langfords of Denver, Colorado, are what happens when old money marries nouveau riche and their offspring are raised by a committee of country club managers and life coaches. They're the kind of people who coordinate their outfits for trips to Target, who have a family crest that may or may not be historically accurate, but definitely costs someone $4,000 to design, and who treat every social interaction like it's a board meeting where your employment status is constantly under review. Diane Langford, Harper's mother, is the kind of woman who makes the phrase, "bless your heart," sound like a legal threat. She's got this perfectly highlighted blonde hair that defies both gravity and the aging process, a wardrobe that consists entirely of neutral tones that probably have names like whispered taupe and contemplative beige, and a smile that never quite reaches her eyes. During that first dinner, she spent 20 minutes asking me about my background. And let me tell you, when rich white people start asking about your background, they're not inquiring about your favorite childhood memories. They want to know if your family tree has the right kind of branches, if your zip code history is acceptable, and whether your net worth makes you worthy of breathing the same air as their precious daughter. I told her I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio, that my dad was a high school teacher and my mom worked in administration at a local hospital, and that I put myself through college on a combination of scholarships, student loans, and a truly regrettable stint working at a call center where I got screamed at by strangers for $8 an hour. Diane's smile got tighter with every word, like someone was slowly turning a screw in her jaw. "How? Industrious," she said, in a tone that made industrious sound like a communicable disease. Gerald Langford, Harper's dad, is the human embodiment of a LinkedIn profile. This man measures human worth exclusively in stock portfolios, real estate holdings, and whether or not you summer as a verb. He's got that silver fox thing going on that probably works great in boardrooms, but makes family dinners feel like hostile takeovers. During our first meeting, he spent exactly 4 minutes asking me about my job in tech consulting before his eyes glazed over like a donut, and he started checking his phone. When I mentioned that I'd recently helped the startup optimize their cloud infrastructure and save about 30% on operational costs, he actually yawned. Yawned. Then he said, "That's nice, sport," and started talking about his golf handicap. I'm 32 years old, and this man called me sport like I was his caddy. But Connor, Harper's little brother is 28, works in private equity, which as far as I can tell means he moves money around and collects a paycheck for it, and has the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to interview for a job in your life. Connor Langford is what happens when privilege and a Patagonia vest merge into human form. During that first dinner, after listening to me explain what I do for exactly 90 seconds, he actually laughed and said, "Tech consulting? That's so cute. It's like what people do before they get real jobs, right?" He said this while cutting his filet mignon that cost more than my car insurance, completely oblivious to the fact that I wanted to stab him with my salad fork. Harper, to her credit, did that thing where she squeezed my hand under the table, which I took as a sign of solidarity, but now realized was probably just her way of saying, "Please don't make a scene and ruin my trust fund access." I smiled, laughed it off, and said something about how I enjoyed the challenge of helping businesses grow, and Connor responded by launching into a 20-minute monologue about crypto that made everyone at the table want to fake a medical emergency. That dinner set the tone for the next 3 years of my life. Every family gathering became this elaborate performance where I played the role of Harper's tolerable but not quite acceptable husband, the guy who was fine for now, but probably wouldn't make the final cut. Thanksgiving, I brought a $15 bottle of wine that I thought was decent, and Diane literally recoiled like I'd handed her a jar of pickled rats. "How thoughtful," she said, before immediately putting it in the back of the pantry next to the expired canned goods. Christmas, Gerald spent the entire gift exchange talking about Connor's impressive year-end bonus while I sat there with my sweater from Kohl's feeling like the human equivalent of a clearance rack. And the conversations, oh God, the conversations. Every single time I walked into a room where Harper's family was gathered, it was like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire universe. They'd be mid-sentence, laughing about something, probably discussing which yacht club has the best lobster rolls or whatever rich people talk about, and then I'd appear in the doorway and boom. Silence. Dead air. Tumbleweeds rolling through the conversation. Then someone, usually Diane, would force this bright smile and say something like, "Oh, there you are," in a tone that suggested she'd forgotten I existed and was mildly annoyed by the reminder. Harper's cousin Madison, who thankfully had married someone equally unacceptable to the family, a public school teacher named Dave, once pulled me aside at a 4th of July barbecue and said, "Dude, you know they do this to everyone who isn't from their weird money cult, right? Just smile, nod, and remember that their approval means literally nothing." I appreciated the solidarity, but it didn't make it any easier to watch my wife laugh at her dad's jokes about people who rent while I stood there, a renter, holding a burger and dying inside. The thing is, I kept showing up. I kept bringing wine, kept laughing at terrible jokes, kept playing nice even when Connor would introduce me to his finance bros as Harper's husband who does computer stuff. I convinced myself that eventually Harper would stand up for me, that she'd tell her mom to back off or tell her brother to show some respect. I thought marriage meant having someone in your corner, someone who'd defend you when you weren't in the room. Plot twist, Harper never defended me. Not once. Not when her mom made passive-aggressive comments about my background. Not when her dad forgot my name at their anniversary party and called me Harry's husband. And yes, he got both our names wrong. Not even when Connor, 3 whiskeys deep at a New Year's Eve party, told everyone that I was punching above my weight class by marrying Harper. I was never a husband to the Langfords. I was an unpaid intern in Harper's success story, a temporary fixture that would eventually be replaced by someone with the right last name, the right portfolio, and the right everything else that I would never be. But I kept playing the game, kept smiling through the humiliation, because I loved Harper and I thought that was enough. Turns out, love doesn't mean squat when you're not invited to the party. Friday morning rolled around with the kind of false cheerfulness that should have come with a warning label. I stood at our front door like some kind of sitcom husband, waving goodbye to Harper as she loaded her unnecessarily large suitcase into her Audi, and I remember thinking how perfectly normal everything seemed. The sun was shining, The neighbors were mowing their lawns even though it was barely 8 in the morning because apparently everyone on our street is psychotic, and my wife was heading off to what she described 17 times as the most boring family reunion in human history. I even did that dorky thing where I called out, "Drive safe," and she blew me a kiss before backing out of the driveway. And if this were a movie, this would be the scene where the audience starts yelling at the screen because they can see the plot twist coming from a mile away, but the main character is completely clueless. That main character was me, by the way. Clueless didn't even begin to cover it. After Harper left, I did what any self-respecting adult does when they have an unexpected weekend alone. Absolutely nothing productive. I made myself another pot of coffee, changed out of my pajama pants into different pajama pants because I'm all about that lifestyle upgrade, and settled onto the couch with Biscuit, who immediately colonized my lap like he was claiming territory. I scrolled through Netflix for approximately 45 minutes, which is the standard amount of time it takes to convince yourself that you've already seen everything worth watching and that maybe you should just rewatch The Office for the 900th time instead of taking a chance on something new. Around 11, I got bored enough to actually consider being productive, which is when I remembered that Harper had left her iPad on the kitchen counter. She's got like 17 devices and can never keep track of which one has what, so it wasn't unusual for her to forget something. I picked it up, thinking maybe I'd text her and ask if she needed me to do anything while she was gone, because I'm a thoughtful husband who definitely wasn't about to stumble onto evidence of my wife's betrayal. The iPad was unlocked, because Harper's approach to device security is basically, whatever, and when I tapped the screen, Spotify was open. Now, I wasn't snooping. Let me make that clear. I was simply observing information that was presented to me on a device that was left in a communal space. That's not snooping. That's just being observant. There's a difference, legally speaking. Probably. The playlist that was pulled up was called Weekend Vibes, which was already suspicious because Harper's usual playlists have names like Cardio Torture and Songs That Won't Annoy Gerald. So this was new territory. I scrolled through the songs, and let me tell you, this was not the soundtrack to a boring family reunion in Denver unless the Langfords had dramatically changed their vibe since Christmas. Track 1, Sunset Beach, by some indie artist I'd never heard of. Track 2, Champagne Dreams. Track 3, Coastal Paradise. Track 4, and this is where I started to feel something twist in my gut, Romantic Nights Under the Stars. There were 37 songs on this playlist, and every single one of them sounded like they belonged in a montage of people living their best lives at an exclusive resort while their chump husbands sat at home watching Shark Tank and wondering why their wives needed a playlist called Weekend Vibes for a family reunion. I sat down at the kitchen island, iPad in hand, and tried to logic my way through this. Maybe Harper just liked to listen to upbeat music while traveling. Maybe the playlist was old and she'd just forgotten to make a new one. Maybe I was being paranoid and insecure, and this was all perfectly innocent, and I should just put the iPad down and go back to my regularly scheduled program of doing nothing. But here's the thing about gut feelings. They're called gut feelings because they hit you right in the stomach like a sucker punch from someone you trusted. And my gut was currently screaming that something was very, very wrong. I opened up the playlist details, and that's when I saw it was created 3 days ago. 3 days. Right around the time Harper had casually mentioned at dinner that she'd be going to this super boring reunion that I definitely wouldn't enjoy. I scrolled down further and noticed she'd been adding songs to it all week, fine-tuning it, perfecting it, creating what was essentially a soundtrack to a lie. My first instinct was to text her immediately and ask what the hell was going on. But then I remembered that I'm a grown man who occasionally makes rational decisions, and firing off an accusatory text based on a Spotify playlist seemed like the kind of thing that would make me look crazy if I was wrong. Which I wasn't. But still. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I told myself I wasn't going to snoop any further. I was going to put the iPad down, walk away, and trust my wife like a mature adult in a functional marriage. I was going to respect her privacy and not go digging through her digital life looking for evidence of something I couldn't even articulate yet. I was going to be the bigger person. That lasted approximately 45 seconds. Then I remembered something beautiful, something that made my moral compass spin like a broken ceiling fan. I pay for Harper's phone plan, and her iPad plan, and basically all of our shared digital services because I'm the one who set everything up and manages the accounts. which meant that technically, legally, in the court of marital gray areas, I had every right to access the account information. Not her personal messages or anything invasive like that, but just general usage data, location history, app downloads, that kind of thing. Moral loophole achieved. I grabbed my laptop, fired it up with the kind of determination usually reserved for people researching conspiracy theories at 3 in the morning, and logged into our wireless carrier's website. Our account dashboard popped up, showing both of our lines, and I navigated to Harper's device information with my heart, doing this weird hammering thing that made me feel like I was either having a cardiac event or becoming the kind of person who checks their spouse's phone records, and honestly, I wasn't sure which was worse. Her current location showed up on the map feature we'd enabled ages ago for safety reasons. Back when we were still at that stage of our relationship, where checking each other's locations felt cute and protective rather than invasive and desperate. I zoomed in, expecting to see her somewhere on the highway between our place and Denver. Maybe stopped at that Starbucks she always hits because their bathroom is apparently the only acceptable one between here and there. The little blue dot representing my wife's phone wasn't on any highway. It was on the coast, 3 hours in the opposite direction from Denver, at a location that, when I zoomed in closer, appeared to be a luxury beach resort with 5 stars on Google Maps and room rates that made my credit card weep just looking at them. I sat there, staring at that blue dot on my laptop screen, and felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak yet, not quite. It was more like the moment right before you realize you've been played, that split second where your brain is still trying to find innocent explanations, but your gut already knows the truth. Harper wasn't at a boring family reunion in Denver. She was at a beach resort, with a playlist called Weekend Vibes, living her best life while I sat at home like the world's most gullible husband. The coffee I'd been drinking all morning suddenly tasted bitter, and not in the good way. Biscuit looked up at me from his spot on the couch, tail wagging slowly, completely oblivious to the fact that his family was falling apart. I wanted to be angry, wanted to feel that clean, sharp rage that would make the next steps obvious. But all I felt was this hollow disappointment, like I'd just found out that the life I thought I was living had been a carefully constructed stage set, and I was the only one who didn't know it was all fake. But I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I had more information. Not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. So I kept watching that blue dot, and I waited. Saturday evening found me exactly where any red-blooded American man wants to be on a weekend, slouched on his couch, eating leftover lasagna straight from the Tupperware like a divorced dad in a beer commercial, watching Shark Tank and judging people's business decisions while making exactly 0 good decisions of my own. Biscuit had claimed his usual spot on the other end of the couch, snoring like a congested lawn mower, and I was 3 episodes deep into a marathon, watching some guy try to convince the Sharks that his app for rating public restrooms was worth $2 million. It wasn't, but I respected the hustle. Harper had texted me a few times throughout the day with updates that were so generic they could have been auto-generated by a bot. Made it safe, at noon. So tired LOL at 3. Miss you. At 6, accompanied by a heart emoji that felt about as genuine as a politician's campaign promise. I'd responded with equally bland messages because that's what you do when you're not quite ready to admit that you know your wife is lying to you. You play along. You pretend. You become complicit in your own humiliation because confronting the truth requires energy you don't have yet. I was just getting to the part where Mr. Wonderful was absolutely destroying the restroom app guy's valuation when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I almost ignored it because nothing good ever comes from phone notifications after 7 p.m., but something made me pick it up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was just dumb luck. Whatever it was, that notification changed everything. Instagram, Lydia_Langford tagged you in a post. Lydia, Harper's aunt. The woman who treated social media like it was her full-time job and documented every single family event with the kind of obsessive detail usually reserved for crime scene investigators. Lydia was 63 years old and had better Instagram game than most influencers, complete with ring lights, hashtag strategies, and a follower count that made me feel personally inadequate. She posted everything. Her morning smoothies, her yoga poses, her thoughts on current events that no one asked for, and especially, every single Langford family gathering, tagged and filtered and captioned with the kind of enthusiasm that made you wonder if she was okay. I opened the app, my thumb moving on autopilot, and the first thing I saw was the photo. Not a photo. The photo. The photo that would eventually launch 1,000 comments and destroy whatever was left of my marriage. But in that moment, it was just an image on a screen, taking a second to load because our Wi-Fi is trash, and I remember thinking in that brief loading period that maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a throwback photo or something innocent. The image loaded, and there she was, my wife, Harper, in a white beach gown that probably cost more than our mortgage payment, barefoot in the sand like some kind of bohemian goddess, holding a champagne flute that caught the golden hour light in a way that made it look like she was in a literal fairy tale. Her hair was down, wavy, perfect, and she was laughing, actually laughing, with her head thrown back in that carefree way she used to laugh with me back when we first started dating, before I became the guy who wasn't good enough for family photos. But it wasn't just Harper. Oh no. Behind her, stretching out like a scene from a wedding magazine, was what could only be described as the most boring family reunion I'd ever seen. Fairy lights strung between palm trees, creating this canopy of twinkling magic. A live band set up on a wooden platform, the kind of band that definitely didn't play Happy Birthday in the traditional sense, but probably knew jazz standards and could improvise for 3 hours straight. Tables covered in white linens with centerpieces that looked professionally arranged. And the food, Jesus Christ, the food. There was a seafood tower in the background that was taller than most toddlers, oysters and shrimp and crab legs arranged in this architectural marvel that probably required engineering degree to construct. The caption, written in Lydia's signature style of excessive enthusiasm and unnecessary capitalization, read, "Happy 60th birthday to the most amazing woman, our beautiful Diane. What an incredible celebration with our favorite people. Blessed beyond measure. Hashtag Langford family, hashtag beach party, hashtag birthday queen, hashtag family first, hashtag grateful, hashtag luxury life, hashtag coastal vibes." I counted 11 hashtags. 11. Because apparently, this event needed to be searchable under multiple categories of life I wasn't invited to. I sat there, lasagna forgotten, staring at this photo like it was one of those magic eye pictures, and if I just looked at it long enough, it would reveal a hidden message that said, "Just kidding." But no hidden message appeared. Just Harper, in all her white gown glory, celebrating her mother's 60th birthday at what was clearly an extremely expensive, extremely exclusive beach party that I, her husband, knew absolutely nothing about. Well, that's not entirely true. I knew it was happening this weekend. I just thought I wasn't invited because it was boring. Turns out, I wasn't invited because I wasn't wanted, which is a completely different category of rejection that hits way harder. I scrolled through the other photos in Lydia's post, because apparently I'm a masochist who enjoys emotional self-harm. There was Diane, the birthday girl herself, wearing a flowing lavender dress and a smile that said, "I'm 60 and fabulous and surrounded by people who meet my standards." There was Gerald, drink in hand, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him, probably because he didn't have to make awkward small talk with his disappointment of a son-in-law. There was Connor, because of course Connor was there, wearing a linen shirt that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, with his arm around some blonde woman I didn't recognize who looked like she'd stepped out of a Vineyard Vines catalog. And there, in a group shot that made my stomach drop like an elevator with cut cables, was the entire Langford family. All of them. Harper's cousins, Madison and Maya, who I'd actually thought were cool. Harper's uncle Richard, who'd promised to take me fishing sometime, a promise I now realized was as empty as his morals. Even Harper's grandmother, who was 92 and rarely left her house, had apparently made the trip for this boring reunion. Every single person who'd ever sat at a Langford dinner table, who'd ever made me feel like I was auditioning for a role I'd never get, who'd ever smiled politely while looking through me like I was made of glass, they were all there. On a beach, at a luxury resort, celebrating Diane's 60th birthday like it was the social event of the season. And I was 90 miles away, eating cold lasagna and babysitting a dog. The comments on Lydia's post were already rolling in, because the woman had posted this approximately 30 seconds ago, and her followers were apparently as obsessive as she was. Gorgeous family. What a beautiful celebration. This looks amazing. Heart emojis, flame emojis, champagne glass emojis. The whole digital parade of people validating this picture-perfect moment that was built on excluding me. I noticed something else, too. Harper hadn't commented yet. Neither had Diane, or Gerald, or Connor, or anyone else who was actually in the photos. Just Lydia's random followers, and a few family friends who probably didn't even know I existed. It was like the Langfords themselves hadn't seen these photos yet, hadn't realized that their carefully orchestrated secret beach party had just been broadcast to the internet with all the subtlety of a fireworks display. Biscuit shifted on the couch, his collar jingling, and looked at me with those concerned dog eyes that suggest either, "Are you okay?" or "Can I have some lasagna?" I set my phone down, face up, so I could keep staring at that photo like it was going to change if I just gave it enough attention. My Shark Tank episode was still playing in the background, Mr. Wonderful now explaining why he was out, and I had this weird moment of clarity where I thought, I'm like that guy with the restroom app. I've been pitching myself to Harper's family for 3 years, and they've all been out since the beginning. I just didn't know it yet. I picked up my phone again, zoomed in on Harper's face in that photo, and studied her expression. She looked happy, genuinely happy. The kind of happy you can't fake even with good lighting and professional photography. She looked like someone who was exactly where she wanted to be, surrounded by exactly who she wanted to be with. And I wasn't there. That's when I made a decision. Not out of anger, not yet. Out of something else. Call it self-respect, call it pettiness, call it whatever you want. But I decided right then, sitting on my couch with cold lasagna and a sleeping dog, that I was done being the invisible man in my own marriage. It was time to become very, very visible. Here's something they don't teach you in marriage counseling or those stupid pre-wedding classes where they make you role-play arguments about finances. What to do when you discover your wife has been lying to you and your first instinct isn't to cry or yell, but to commit an act of social media warfare that would make the founding fathers proud. I sat there on my couch, staring at Lydia's Instagram post like it was the Rosetta Stone of betrayal, and felt this weird calm wash over me. Not the peaceful kind of calm, but the dangerous kind. The kind that comes right before someone does something spectacularly petty that they'll either regret forever or celebrate as their finest moment. I wasn't going to text Harper. I wasn't going to call her and demand explanations while she scrambled to come up with more lies. I wasn't going to have some private confrontation that she could spin or manipulate or gaslight me about later. No, I was going to do something way better, something that would make everyone who'd excluded me extremely uncomfortable while simultaneously making me look like either a genius or a psychopath, depending on your perspective. I was going to fight fire with perfectly curated social media content. First, I needed the right photo. You can't just throw together a revenge post with a random selfie and expect it to land. This required strategy, composition, messaging. I was basically about to create the Sistine Chapel of passive-aggressive Instagram posts. And Michelangelo didn't just wing it, you know? He had a vision. And my vision involved making the Langfords squirm while maintaining plausible deniability that I was doing anything wrong. I looked around our living room, taking inventory of potential props and backdrops. The couch was too casual. The kitchen was too domestic. I needed something that said, I'm fine, everything is fine, I'm definitely not sitting here realizing my marriage is a sham, while also clearly communicating, I'm absolutely not fine and everyone should feel bad about this. Then I saw it. Harper's closet. Specifically, the sweatshirt she'd bought last year that said, Boring Reunion, in ironic hipster font across the chest. She'd gotten it as a joke after one of her actual boring work conferences, wore it exactly twice, and then relegated it to the back of her closet where it had been living its best forgotten life. Until now. I walked into our bedroom, where I'd been sleeping alone for one night, and would probably be sleeping alone for the foreseeable future, and dug through Harper's side of the closet until I found it. The sweatshirt was cream-colored, soft, probably cost $60 because Harper doesn't buy anything that isn't inexplicably expensive, and it was perfect. Absolutely perfect. I pulled it on over my t-shirt, went back to the living room, and scooped up Biscuit, who immediately started licking my face because he's the only loyal family member I have left. I positioned us on the couch, made sure the lighting was decent, not great, because this needed to look casual and spontaneous even though it was extremely calculated, and held my phone out at arm's length. Okay, buddy, I said to Biscuit, who was now trying to eat my hair. We're about to either save my dignity or destroy what's left of my social life. 50-50 shot here. I took about 17 photos because apparently I've internalized Harper's influencer tendencies through osmosis and scrolled through them to find the best one. Most of them were trash, bad angles, Biscuit looking away, my face doing that weird thing where I look like I'm either constipated or about to sneeze. But photo number 12 was gold. I looked tired but not pathetic. Biscuit was gazing at the camera with those soulful eyes that made him look like the goodest boy who ever lived. And the boring reunion text on the sweatshirt was perfectly visible and centered. Now came the hard part, the caption. This needed to be sharp enough to draw blood, but subtle enough that I could claim innocence if anyone accused me of being malicious. It needed to say everything while technically saying nothing. It needed to be the kind of caption that future generations would study in communication classes as either a masterpiece or a cautionary tale. I typed and deleted approximately 47 different versions. Some reunions really are boring was too vague. Wish I could be there was too passive. Thanks for the invite, fam was too obviously sarcastic. I needed something that would make people stop mid-scroll, something that would make Harper's phone explode with notifications, something that would make Diane Langford choke on her birthday champagne. Finally, I landed on it. Some reunions really are boring, especially when you're not invited. Simple, direct, devastating. The kind of caption that sounds casual but lands like a tactical nuke. I added the photo, checked the caption one more time, and hovered my thumb over the share button like it was a detonator and I was about to blow up my entire life. This is crazy, I said out loud to Biscuit, who had now fallen asleep in my arms and was snoring directly into my armpit. I'm about to publicly call out my wife and her entire family on Instagram. This is not how healthy adults handle conflict. This is how people end up on daytime television shows where everyone throws chairs. But you know what? I didn't care. I was done being the understanding husband, the guy who smiled and nodded and pretended not to notice when he was being erased from his own family. I was done being excluded from the narrative while paying for the subscription. I hit share. For about 30 seconds, nothing happened. The post went live, sitting there in my feed with 0 likes and 0 comments. And I had this brief moment of panic where I thought maybe no one would even see it. Maybe I'd just committed social media suicide for an audience of nobody. But then, like watching a horror movie where you know the jump scare is coming, but it still gets you, my phone started buzzing. The first like came from my buddy Marcus, who I'd gone to college with and who had absolutely no context for what was happening, but apparently appreciated the vibe. Then came a comment from my coworker Jennifer. Wait, what reunion? 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing more, and I watched as she added, Dude, are you okay? Then the floodgates opened. My cousin Amy, who'd met Harper exactly twice and had immediately clocked her as high maintenance. Snap. What's happening? My former roommate Derek, who loved drama more than oxygen. BRO. Details. Now, Harper's college friend Vanessa, who was apparently just as confused as everyone else. Harper's at a reunion? I thought she was working this weekend. And then, the comment that made my heart stop. Wait, is that the Langford beach party? From someone named Jessica who I didn't even know, but who apparently knew enough to connect the dots. Within 15 minutes, the post had 40 likes. Within 30 minutes, it had over 100, and people were sharing it to their stories with confused emoji reactions. My phone was vibrating so continuously that it sounded like an angry bee had taken up residence in my pocket. Someone, I think it was my sister Kate, bless her messy soul, tagged Harper in the comments with just a simple, which is the universal social media symbol for explain yourself immediately or face public judgment. The likes kept climbing. The comments kept coming. People I hadn't talked to in years were suddenly very interested in my weekend plans. And somewhere, on a beach 90 miles away, I knew Harper's phone was probably exploding with notifications, her carefully constructed lie crumbling in real time while she stood there in her white gown, holding champagne, and wondering how the hell her invisible husband had suddenly become the main character. I refreshed the post. 200 likes. 300. Comments multiplying like rabbits. Someone had already made it into a meme, which honestly was faster than I expected, but also kind of impressive. Biscuit woke up, yawned, and looked at me like I was crazy, which was fair because I probably was. But you know what? For the first time in 3 years of being married into the Langford family, For the first time since I'd started playing their game and following their rules and making myself smaller to fit into their picture-perfect world, I felt like I actually existed. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was viral. By Sunday morning, my Instagram post had done what nuclear weapons wish they could do: create maximum destruction with surgical precision while leaving the infrastructure mostly intact for everyone to witness the aftermath. I woke up at 7 to discover my phone had received so many notifications overnight that it had drained my battery from 60% to 8%, which is honestly impressive considering the thing was just sitting on my nightstand judging my life choices. 372 likes, 194 comments, 47 shares, and one very long, very detailed group text thread that I wasn't supposed to be part of, but that Harper's cousin Maya had screenshot and sent to me with the message, "You need to see this. It's absolute chaos." I'm screaming. The group chat was called Langford Beach Weekend, which was honestly pretty lazy naming for a family that prides itself on aesthetic excellence. But whatever. Maya had been added to it Friday morning, presumably to coordinate logistics and make sure everyone knew which designer beachwear was appropriate for which event. The messages from Friday and Saturday were exactly what you'd expect. "Can't wait to see everyone. And the decorations look amazing, and Diane deserves the world," with enough heart and champagne emojis to make a sorority girl say, "Okay, that's excessive." But Sunday morning? Sunday morning was beautiful, catastrophic chaos. The messages started rolling in around 6 a.m. Pacific time, which meant the Langfords were up early dealing with the social media equivalent of finding out their house was on fire and everyone they knew was standing outside watching it burn while eating popcorn. "Connor, why is Harper's husband posting weird stuff about not being invited?" "Aunt Lydia, oh no. Oh no. Did I tag him? I didn't mean to tag him." "Harper's cousin Madison, you absolutely tagged him, Lydia. It's right there in the post." "Diane, someone please tell me what's happening." "Gerald, do you understand Instagram?" "Gerald, I don't even know what a tag is, Diane." "Uncle Richard just checked his post. He's got like 400 likes now. This is not great." "Connor, not great? Dude is making us look like we excluded him." "Which we did. But he's not supposed to say that." There was a gap of about 15 minutes, which I imagine was everyone frantically trying to figure out how to do damage control. And then Harper finally chimed in with, "I'm handling it. Everyone please stop panicking." "Aunt Lydia, should I delete my post?" "Madison, it's too late, Lydia. People have already screenshot everything. The internet is forever. This is literally the first thing they teach you about social media." "Maya, I mean, we kind of did exclude him though." "That's not exactly a secret." "Connor, whose side are you on, Maya?" "Maya, the side of not being trash humans?" Just a thought. I was reading these screenshots while making coffee, and I'm not gonna lie, I was enjoying this way more than any person should enjoy watching their marriage implode. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, except the car was a Mercedes and everyone inside was wearing designer sunglasses and suddenly realizing that maybe, just maybe, they'd been the villains all along. My phone buzzed with an actual text from Harper. Not a group text, not a comment, but a direct message that said, "You're being dramatic." I stared at those 3 words for a solid minute. "You're being dramatic." Not "I'm sorry." Not "let me explain." Not even "we need to talk." Just a straight-up accusation that my reaction to being secretly excluded from a family event was somehow the problem, not the actual exclusion itself. I typed back, "You're wearing a white gown at a beach party. Are you auditioning for Runaway Bride too? Or is this just a regular Tuesday for you?" 3 dots appeared immediately, which meant she was typing something long and probably defensive. I waited, sipping my coffee, while Biscuit sat at my feet and stared at me with an expression that either meant, "I'm proud of you," or "I really need to pee." It's hard to tell with dogs. Harper's response came through. My mother didn't want to make a big deal about her birthday. She specifically requested a small, intimate gathering. "You would have been uncomfortable anyway. You always are at family events." Oh, we were doing this. We were really doing this. She was going to try to gaslight me into believing that excluding me was actually an act of kindness, like she'd done me a favor by lying to my face and going to a luxury beach resort while I sat at home eating lasagna and watching reality TV. I responded, "Right, because nothing says small and intimate like a live band, a seafood tower, and enough fairy lights to be visible from space. Also, Thanks for looking out for my comfort by letting me spend the weekend wondering why my wife needed a playlist called Romantic Nights Under the Stars for a boring family reunion. The three dots appeared and disappeared about 5 times, which is the text message equivalent of someone opening their mouth to argue and then realizing they don't have a leg to stand on. Finally, she sent, "We'll talk about this when I get home. Looking forward to it." I typed back, even though we both knew that conversation was going to be about as pleasant as a root canal performed by someone who doesn't believe in anesthesia. My phone rang approximately 3 minutes later, and the caller ID said Diane Langford, which was about as welcome as a surprise IRS audit. I considered not answering, but then I thought, you know what? Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Let's find out exactly how this woman justifies excluding her daughter's husband from a family event. I answered with my most cheerful voice, "Diane, happy belated birthday. I saw the photos on Instagram. Looked like quite the boring reunion you had there." There was a pause, the kind of pause that happens when someone who's used to controlling every conversation suddenly realizes they're not in control anymore. Then, "I'm calling because you've embarrassed this family with your little stunt on social media." My stunt. I actually laughed out loud, which seemed to offend her even more. "Diane, I posted a picture of myself in a sweatshirt with my dog. If that embarrassed you, maybe the problem isn't the picture." "You know exactly what you did," she said, her voice doing that tight thing it does when she's trying to sound authoritative but really just sounds constipated. "You made it seem like we deliberately excluded you. You did deliberately exclude me." It was a milestone birthday celebration. Very exclusive, very carefully curated. We wanted to maintain a certain atmosphere. "Ah, yes," I said, "the atmosphere. I've heard about this. Is that the same atmosphere that requires everyone to coordinate their outfits? Or is this a different atmospheric pressure system?" "This is exactly why you weren't invited," she snapped, and there it was. The truth, finally, without the pretty packaging. You don't take things seriously. You don't understand the importance of family image. You're always making jokes when we're trying to have meaningful moments. Meaningful moments, I repeated. Right? Nothing more meaningful than excluding your son-in-law from a family event and then getting mad when he notices. She launched into this whole speech about family dynamics and respect and how I needed to understand that not everything was about me. And I let her talk because honestly, it was kind of fascinating watching someone try to justify being a terrible person using the language of etiquette and propriety. She was like if Emily Post wrote a handbook on how to be exclusionary with class. When she finally ran out of steam, I said, "Diane, I'm going to be real with you for a second. I've spent 3 years trying to be good enough for your family. I've smiled through the passive-aggressive comments, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and pretended not to notice when conversations stopped the second I walked into a room. But you know what? I'm done. I'm done pretending that your approval matters. I'm done making myself smaller so you can feel bigger. And I'm definitely done apologizing for posting a picture that told the truth you all wanted to keep hidden. How dare you?" She started, but I was already done. "Happy birthday, Diane. I'm sure it was everything you wanted, which apparently included not having me there. Glad I could help make it perfect by staying home." I hung up. My phone immediately buzzed with another text, this time from Harper's cousin Maya. "Dude, I need to tell you something. The reason you weren't invited? Diane literally said you didn't fit the aesthetic of her birthday photos." Direct quote. "I'm so sorry. This family is toxic." I read that message 3 times, letting it sink in. I didn't fit the aesthetic. Like I was a piece of furniture that clashed with the curtains, or a painting that didn't match the color scheme. 3 years of marriage, and to my mother-in-law, I was nothing more than a visual inconvenience. I typed back to Maya, "Thanks for telling me. And hey, at least now I know where I stand." Turns out, I don't stand anywhere near the beach. She sent back a crying laughing emoji, and then, for what it's worth, half the family thinks this whole thing is ridiculous. We're Team U. It was a small comfort, but I'd take it. Sunday night rolled around with the inevitability of a horror movie sequel nobody asked for. I'd spent the day fielding texts from friends, family members I hadn't talked to since my wedding, and even my old college professor who apparently followed me on Instagram and wanted to know if I was holding up okay. The answer was yes, no, and also maybe I'd lost my mind, but in a productive way that might end with me either in therapy or as the subject of a think piece about modern marriage. Harper texted around 4 p.m. to let me know she was leaving the resort and would be home by 7. No apology. No acknowledgement of the fact that the internet had basically turned her family into a meme. Just leaving soon. We need to talk. Which is what people say when they're about to make their terrible behavior your fault somehow. I spent those 3 hours cleaning the house. Not because I'm a nervous cleaner, but because I wanted her to walk into a spotless home and realize that I'd been perfectly fine without her. The dishes were done. The floors were vacuumed. I even folded the throw blankets on the couch in that decorative way she likes. The way that makes them completely useless as actual blankets, but looks great in photos. I was petty enough to want her to see that I didn't need her, but not petty enough to let her come home to a disaster zone. There's a fine line between making a point and living like a feral raccoon, and I was determined to stay on the right side of it. At 7:15 p.m., I heard her car pull into the driveway. Biscuit's ears perked up and he ran to the front door doing that excited dog thing where his entire butt wags along with his tail, because he's a good boy who doesn't understand that his mom is potentially the villain in this story. I stayed on the couch, beer in hand, watching the door like I was in a Western, and this was the final showdown. The door opened. Harper walked in, and let me tell you, she looked like she'd just gone 12 rounds with guilt and anxiety. Her hair, which had been perfectly beach-waved in all those Instagram photos, was now pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't wearing the white gown anymore. Shocking, I know, but instead had on yoga pants and an oversized sweater, the universal uniform of women who are about to have a difficult conversation. She was dragging that massive suitcase behind her, and when she saw me sitting there on the couch, she actually flinched. "Hey," she said, like this was a normal Sunday evening and she hadn't just spent the weekend lying to me. "Hey yourself," I said, taking a sip of my beer with the kind of casual energy that took significant effort to maintain. "How was the boring reunion?" She closed her eyes for a second, did this deep breathing thing she probably learned from a wellness influencer, and said, "Can we not do this right now? I'm exhausted." "Oh, I bet you are. All that champagne and seafood and lying takes it out of you." She left her suitcase by the door, walked past me into the kitchen, and I heard her opening the fridge. Biscuit followed her, tail still wagging, the only innocent party in this entire disaster. When she came back, she had a bottle of water and the kind of defensive posture that meant she'd prepared talking points during the drive home. "Why would you post that?" she asked, sitting down on the chair across from me, not on the couch next to me. That distance told me everything I needed to know about where this conversation was headed. Because apparently, my invitation drowned somewhere between boring reunion and exclusive beach bash, I said. "Did you try looking for it near the seafood tower? Maybe it got lost under all those oysters." "This isn't funny," she snapped. "You're right, it's not. It's actually pretty sad. But if I don't laugh about it, I'll probably lose my mind. So forgive me for finding humor in the fact that my wife lied to my face." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and did this thing where she pressed her fingers to her temples like she was getting a migraine. It was Mom's decision, not mine. And there it was. The defense I'd been waiting for. The classic, "it wasn't my fault, someone else made me do it," excuse that people use when they don't want to take responsibility for their own choices. "Oh good," I said, setting my beer down on the coffee table with more force than necessary. Because marriage vows clearly include in sickness, health, and total family betrayal. I must have missed that part during the ceremony. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice had this pleading quality that might have worked on me a week ago, but not anymore. Not after I'd spent the weekend being publicly humiliated and then watching her family scramble to make me the problem. My mom's 60th birthday was really important to her. She wanted it to be perfect. She had a very specific vision, and I didn't fit the aesthetic, I interrupted. "Yeah, Maya told me. Direct quote from your mother. I didn't fit the aesthetic of the birthday photos. Do you understand how dehumanizing that is? I'm not a lamp, Harper. I'm your husband." She went pale. Like, actually pale, which was impressive considering she'd just spent the weekend on a beach. "Maya told you that. Don't blame Maya for having a conscience. At least someone in your family does." "That's not fair," she said, but her voice was weak, like she knew it was absolutely fair and just didn't want to admit it. "You want to know what's not fair?" I stood up, because sitting down made me feel like I was the one on trial here, and I was done being defensive about telling the truth. "What's not fair is spending 3 years trying to win over your family. What's not fair is smiling through every passive-aggressive comment. Every time your dad forgets my name. Every time Connor acts like my job is a cute hobby. What's not fair is believing that if I just tried harder, was nicer, brought better wine, laughed at the right jokes, that eventually they'd accept me. They do accept you. She tried, but even she didn't sound convinced. Harper, your mother literally said I didn't fit the aesthetic. That's not acceptance. That's tolerance at best, and even that's being generous. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her trying to formulate a response that would somehow make this okay, that would smooth over the fact that she'd chosen her family's comfort over her husband's dignity. Finally, she said, "You made me look bad online." I actually laughed. Like, a real laugh. The kind that comes from a place of disbelief so deep it could reach the earth's core. "I made you look bad?" "Harper, you made yourself look bad. I just posted a picture. You're the one who lied about where you were going. You're the one who chose to go along with your mother's decision to exclude me. You're the one who created this entire situation." "I didn't have a choice," she said, standing up now too, her voice rising. "You don't know what it's like, trying to keep everyone happy. My mom's been planning this party for months. She had everything coordinated, every detail perfect, and she said." Harper stopped herself, but I could fill in the rest. She said what? That I'd ruin the vibe? That I'd embarrass her? That having me there would somehow taint her precious birthday celebration? "She said you'd make it awkward," Harper admitted quietly, and there was something almost relieved in her voice, like she'd been carrying this secret around and was glad to finally put it down, even if it meant destroying what was left of our marriage. "I'd make it awkward," I repeated, letting those words hang in the air between us. "So instead of standing up for me, instead of telling your mother that I'm your husband and where you go, I go, you just went along with it. You lied to me, packed your bags, made a playlist full of romantic beach songs, and left me here like I was some kind of inconvenient roommate. It was one weekend," she said, but she was crying now, and I couldn't tell if the tears were from guilt or frustration or just the realization that she'd screwed up in a way that couldn't be unfixed with an apology and some quality time. "It wasn't one weekend, Harper. It was 3 years of one weekends. 3 years of me being too busy to come to family events, or you going alone because it was easier. 3 years of me slowly realizing that I'm not part of your family. I'm just the guy you married despite them." "That's not true," she said, but it was. "Then why didn't you defend me? When your mom said I didn't fit the aesthetic, why didn't you tell her that was insane? When Connor called my job cute, why didn't you shut that down? When I walked into rooms and conversations died, why did you just let it happen?" She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, but it wasn't one she wanted to say out loud. We stood there, facing each other across our living room, and I could feel the distance between us growing with every second of silence. Finally, she said, "So what happens now?" "Now." I picked up my beer, finished it, and set the empty bottle down. "Now you have a choice. You can either be my wife, which means standing up to your family and setting boundaries, or you can be Diane's daughter and Connor's sister, and keep living in their world where I'm just the guy who didn't make the cut. But you can't be both. I'm done pretending you can." "That's not fair," she said again, because apparently that was her go-to phrase tonight. "Yeah, well, neither was lying to me about a beach party while I sat at home eating leftovers. So I guess we're even." She grabbed her suitcase, turned toward the stairs, and said without looking at me, "I'm going to bed. We can talk about this later when we're both calmer." "Sure," I said. "Take all the time you need. I've got nowhere to be." Apparently, I never do. She dragged her suitcase up the stairs, and I heard our bedroom door close with a definitive click. Biscuit looked up at me, confused, and I scratched his ears and said, "Just you and me again, buddy. Story of my life." Sunday night rolled around with the inevitability of a horror movie sequel nobody asked for. I'd spent the day fielding texts from friends, family members I hadn't talked to since my wedding, and even my old college professor who apparently followed me on Instagram and wanted to know if I was holding up okay. The answer was yes, no, and also maybe I'd lost my mind, but in a productive way that might end with me either in therapy or as the subject of a think piece about modern marriage. Harper texted around 4 p.m. to let me know she was leaving the resort and would be home by 7. No apology. No acknowledgement of the fact that the internet had basically turned her family into a meme. Just leaving soon. We need to talk. Which is what people say when they're about to make their terrible behavior your fault somehow. I spent those 3 hours cleaning the house. Not because I'm a nervous cleaner, but because I wanted her to walk into a spotless home and realize that I'd been perfectly fine without her. The dishes were done. The floors were vacuumed. I even folded the throw blankets on the couch in that decorative way she likes. The way that makes them completely useless as actual blankets, but looks great in photos. I was petty enough to want her to see that I didn't need her, but not petty enough to let her come home to a disaster zone. There's a fine line between making a point and living like a feral raccoon, and I was determined to stay on the right side of it. At 7:15 p.m., I heard her car pull into the driveway. Biscuit's ears perked up and he ran to the front door doing that excited dog thing where his entire butt wags along with his tail, because he's a good boy who doesn't understand that his mom is potentially the villain in this story. I stayed on the couch, beer in hand, watching the door like I was in a western, and this was the final showdown. The door opened. Harper walked in, and let me tell you, she looked like she'd just gone 12 rounds with guilt and anxiety. Her hair, which had been perfectly beach-waved in all those Instagram photos, was now pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't wearing the white gown anymore. Shocking, I know, but instead had on yoga pants and an oversized sweater, the universal uniform of women who are about to have a difficult conversation. She was dragging that massive suitcase behind her, and when she saw me sitting there on the couch, she actually flinched. "Hey," she said, like this was a normal Sunday evening and she hadn't just spent the weekend lying to me. "Hey yourself," I said, taking a sip of my beer with the kind of casual energy that took significant effort to maintain. "How was the boring reunion?" She closed her eyes for a second, did this deep breathing thing she probably learned from a wellness influencer, and said, "Can we not do this right now? I'm exhausted." "Oh, I bet you are. All that champagne and seafood and lying takes it out of you." She left her suitcase by the door, walked past me into the kitchen, and I heard her opening the fridge. Biscuit followed her, tail still wagging, the only innocent party in this entire disaster. When she came back, she had a bottle of water and the kind of defensive posture that meant she'd prepared talking points during the drive home. "Why would you post that?" she asked, sitting down on the chair across from me, not on the couch next to me. That distance told me everything I needed to know about where this conversation was headed. Because apparently, my invitation drowned somewhere between boring reunion and exclusive beach bash, I said. "Did you try looking for it near the seafood tower? Maybe it got lost under all those oysters." "This isn't funny," she snapped. "You're right, it's not. It's actually pretty sad. But if I don't laugh about it, I'll probably lose my mind. So forgive me for finding humor in the fact that my wife lied to my face." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and did this thing where she pressed her fingers to her temples like she was getting a migraine. It was Mom's decision, not mine. And there it was. The defense I'd been waiting for. The classic, "it wasn't my fault. Someone else made me do it," excuse that people use when they don't want to take responsibility for their own choices. "Oh, good," I said, setting my beer down on the coffee table with more force than necessary. Because marriage vows clearly include, in sickness, health, and total family betrayal. I must have missed that part during the ceremony. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice had this pleading quality that might have worked on me a week ago, but not anymore. Not after I'd spent the weekend being publicly humiliated and then watching her family scramble to make me the problem. My mom's 60th birthday was really important to her. She wanted it to be perfect. She had a very specific vision, and I didn't fit the aesthetic, I interrupted. "Yeah, Maya told me. Direct quote from your mother. I didn't fit the aesthetic of the birthday photos. Do you understand how dehumanizing that is? I'm not a lamp, Harper. I'm your husband." She went pale. Like, actually pale, which was impressive considering she'd just spent the weekend on a beach. "Maya told you that. Don't blame Maya for having a conscience. At least someone in your family does." "That's not fair," she said, but her voice was weak, like she knew it was absolutely fair and just didn't want to admit it. "You want to know what's not fair?" I stood up, because sitting down made me feel like I was the one on trial here, and I was done being defensive about telling the truth. What's not fair is spending 3 years trying to win over your family. What's not fair is smiling through every passive-aggressive comment, every time your dad forgets my name, every time Connor acts like my job is a cute hobby. What's not fair is believing that if I just tried harder, was nicer, brought better wine, laughed at the right jokes, that eventually they'd accept me. They do accept you. She tried, but even she didn't sound convinced. Harper, your mother literally said I didn't fit the aesthetic. That's not acceptance. That's tolerance at best, and even that's being generous. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her trying to formulate a response that would somehow make this okay, that would smooth over the fact that she'd chosen her family's comfort over her husband's dignity. Finally, she said, you made me look bad online. I actually laughed. Like, a real laugh. The kind that comes from a place of disbelief so deep it could reach the earth's core. I made you look bad? Harper, you made yourself look bad. I just posted a picture. You're the one who lied about where you were going. You're the one who chose to go along with your mother's decision to exclude me. You're the one who created this entire situation. I didn't have a choice, she said, standing up now too, her voice rising. You don't know what it's like, trying to keep everyone happy. My mom's been planning this party for months. She had everything coordinated, every detail perfect, and she said, Harper stopped herself, but I could fill in the rest. She said what? That I'd ruin the vibe? That I'd embarrass her? That having me there would somehow taint her precious birthday celebration? She said you'd make it awkward, Harper admitted quietly, and there was something almost relieved in her voice, like she'd been carrying this secret around and was glad to finally put it down, even if it meant destroying what was left of our marriage. I'd make it awkward, I repeated, letting those words hang in the air between us. So instead of standing up for me, instead of telling your mother that I'm your husband and where you go, I go, you just went along with it. You lied to me, packed your bags, made a playlist full of romantic beach songs, and left me here like I was some kind of inconvenient roommate. It was one weekend, she said, but she was crying now, and I couldn't tell if the tears were from guilt or frustration or just the realization that she'd screwed up in a way that couldn't be unfixed with an apology and some quality time. It wasn't one weekend, Harper. It was 3 years of one weekends. 3 years of me being too busy to come to family events, or you going alone because it was easier. 3 years of me slowly realizing that I'm not part of your family. I'm just the guy you married despite them. That's not true, she said, but it was. Then why didn't you defend me? When your mom said I didn't fit the aesthetic, why didn't you tell her that was insane? When Connor called my job cute, why didn't you shut that down? When I walked into rooms and conversations died, why did you just let it happen? She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, but it wasn't one she wanted to say out loud. We stood there, facing each other across our living room, and I could feel the distance between us growing with every second of silence. Finally, she said, so what happens now? Now. I picked up my beer, finished it, and set the empty bottle down. Now you have a choice. You can either be my wife, which means standing up to your family and setting boundaries, or you can be Diane's daughter and Connor's sister and keep living in their world where I'm just the guy who didn't make the cut. But you can't be both. I'm done pretending you can. That's not fair, she said again, because apparently that was her go-to phrase tonight. Yeah, well, neither was lying to me about a beach party while I sat at home eating leftovers. So I guess we're even. She grabbed her suitcase, turned toward the stairs, and said without looking at me, I'm going to bed. We can talk about this later when we're both calmer. Sure, I said. Take all the time you need. I've got nowhere to be. Apparently, I never do. She dragged her suitcase up the stairs, and I heard our bedroom door close with a definitive click. Biscuit looked up at me, confused, and I scratched his ears and said, just you and me again, buddy. Story of my life. Monday morning, I woke up to discover that my Instagram post had officially transcended viral moment and entered cultural phenomenon territory, which is both the best and worst thing that can happen to a person who just wanted to call out his wife's family for being exclusionary jerks. My follower count had jumped from a modest 847, mostly college friends, coworkers, and random people I met at parties, to 12,400 overnight. 12,400 people now had access to my mediocre food photos and occasional dog content, all because I committed the apparently revolutionary act of posting honestly about being excluded. The post itself had hit 15,000 likes, which was more validation than I'd received in my entire marriage combined. The comments section had become this weird support group for people who'd been excluded by their in-laws, with hundreds of strangers sharing their own horror stories about families who treated them like temporary inconveniences. Someone had created a hashtag Beachgate. It was trending locally. I'd become a meme, and honestly, there are worse legacies. But the real chaos started when the local news picked it up. Channel 7, the station that usually covers city council meetings and farmers markets, ran a segment called Social Media Husband's Beach Party Exclusion Goes Viral during their morning show. They pixelated my face, which was both insulting and hilarious, and had a panel discussion about whether it was appropriate to air family grievances on social media. Two panelists said no, one said yes, and the moderator looked like she regretted every career choice that led to this moment. My phone hadn't stopped ringing. My mom called 3 times before I finally answered, and she spent 20 minutes asking if I was okay, while simultaneously being proud that I'd stood up for myself. My sister Kate sent me approximately 40 texts, mostly memes she'd made about the situation, including one that photoshopped my face onto a "Survived My In-Laws" t-shirt. Even my boss, Greg, who I'd worked with for 4 years and who'd never shown interest in my personal life, sent an email that said, "Saw the post. Hilarious. Also, we should talk." That "we should talk" turned out to be the most unexpected development in this entire disaster. Greg called me around 10 a.m. and I answered expecting him to tell me that my personal drama was unprofessional and maybe I should consider taking it down. But instead he said, "How would you feel about doing some marketing consulting for us? Specifically, authentic storytelling campaigns?" I almost laughed. "You want me to do marketing?" "Greg, I do tech consulting. I optimize cloud infrastructure. I've never written a marketing campaign in my life." "Yeah, but you just ran the most successful authentic engagement campaign I've seen in years," he said. "You told a real story, people connected with it, and now everyone's talking about authenticity and honesty in relationships. That's marketing gold. We've got a client who wants to rebrand around genuine connection, and honestly, you'd be perfect." So apparently, being publicly betrayed by your in-laws is a marketable skill now. Welcome to 2025, where your trauma can become your brand if you package it correctly. But it got weirder. Harper's cousin Maya, the only Langford who seemed to have functioning moral compass, reached out with a proposition. "I run a social media management business," she said over coffee Tuesday afternoon at a cafe far enough from our neighborhood that we wouldn't run into any mutual acquaintances. "And I've been watching what you did. It was brilliant. Not just the post itself, but how you handled the fallout. You need to monetize this." "Monetize my marriage falling apart?" I asked, stirring my coffee and wondering when my life became a Black Mirror episode. "Monetize your authenticity," she corrected. "Do you know how many people are desperate for someone to just tell the truth about family dynamics? About toxic in-laws? About feeling invisible in their own relationships? You tapped into something real, and people are responding. Let me help you build on that." So we did. Maya helped me create actual content. Not just random posts, but strategic storytelling about navigating difficult family relationships, setting boundaries, and finding your voice when everyone else wants you to stay quiet. We turned #Beachgate into a mini brand, complete with a blog, a newsletter, and even merchandise. Yes, someone can now buy a "Didn't Fit the Aesthetic" t-shirt, and yes, they're selling. My follower count hit 25,000 by Wednesday. Brands started reaching out about partnerships. A podcast called Toxic In-Laws Anonymous invited me as a guest. Someone from a publishing house sent an email asking if I'd ever considered writing a book. Meanwhile, Harper's brother Connor sent me a message that simply said, "You're ruining Mom's image." I replied, "Tell Mom to invest in better PR." He blocked me immediately, which honestly felt like a win. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that excluded me because I didn't fit their perfect image was now dealing with the consequences of their own image management failing spectacularly. Diane Langford, who'd spent 60 years cultivating a reputation as Denver's most gracious hostess, was now known as the mother-in-law who excluded her son-in-law from a beach party because he didn't match the aesthetic. The internet is forever, and it has a long memory for petty cruelty. Harper still wasn't talking to me beyond logistical household questions like, "Did you pay the electric bill? And can you pick up dog food?" We were roommates now, coexisting in the same space, but living completely separate lives. She'd moved into the guest room, which she claimed was temporary, but felt pretty permanent based on how she'd rearranged the furniture. Turns out, being publicly betrayed pays surprisingly well. My consulting work had tripled, my social media presence was growing daily, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like people actually saw me. Not as Harper's husband, not as the Langfords' disappointing son-in-law, but as myself. It was almost worth the destroyed marriage. Almost. 2 weeks after hashtag Beachgate exploded across the internet, Harper announced she was moving in with her parents until things cooled off, which is divorced people speak for, "I'm leaving but don't want to use the actual words because that makes it real." She said this while packing another suitcase, her third one in as many days. And I just nodded from the doorway of what used to be our bedroom and was now apparently just my bedroom. "How long do you think it'll take for things to cool off?" I asked, watching her fold cashmere sweaters with the kind of precision that suggested she'd been planning this exit strategy for a while. She didn't look at me. "I don't know. A few weeks? A month? My mom thinks we need space to figure out what we really want." "Ah, yes, your mom. The expert on healthy relationships. The woman who excluded me from a party because I didn't match her color scheme. Definitely the person we should be taking advice from right now." Harper finally looked up, and her eyes had that tired quality that comes from crying in your car during lunch breaks and pretending everything's fine. "Can you not be sarcastic for like 5 minutes? This is hard for me too." "Right, sorry. I forgot how difficult it must be to move back into your childhood mansion while I stay here in the house we bought together, paying the mortgage by myself, and explaining to our neighbors why your car hasn't been in the driveway for 2 weeks. She zipped up the suitcase with enough force to make the zipper scream in protest. "I'll still pay my half of the bills." "Oh good, because that's definitely what I'm most concerned about right now. The bills. Not the fact that my wife is moving out without actually saying the words, 'I'm moving out,' because she'd rather pretend this is a temporary cooling off period instead of what it actually is." "And what is it actually?" she asked, and I could hear the challenge in her voice, like she wanted me to be the one to say it first so she could tell her family that I was the one who gave up. "It's you choosing them over me," I said. "Again, like you've been doing for 3 years, except now you're just being more obvious about it." She left 20 minutes later, dragging her suitcase down the front steps while I stood in the doorway with Biscuit, both of us watching her load up her car like we were witnessing the end of an era. Which we were. She didn't cry, didn't hug me goodbye, just got in her Audi, backed out of the driveway, and drove toward her parents' house, where she'd be welcomed with open arms and probably a charcuterie board because the Langfords cope with emotional turmoil through expensive cheese. But here's the thing about Rock Bottom. It's got surprisingly good Wi-Fi and excellent networking opportunities. While Harper was settling back into her childhood bedroom with its walk-in closet and in-soot bathroom, I was fielding job offers like I was some kind of hot commodity instead of a guy whose marriage had just imploded on social media. The marketing agency Greg had mentioned, they offered me a 6-month contract handling their Authentic Voices campaign for a tech startup that wanted to rebrand around genuine human connection. The irony of being hired to promote authenticity after my authentic post destroyed my marriage wasn't lost on anyone, especially me. "You're basically the poster child for keeping it real," said Rachel, the agency's creative director, during our first meeting. She was maybe 30, had pink hair, and treated my personal drama like it was a case study in successful viral marketing. "People trust you because you weren't trying to go viral. You were just telling the truth. That's the magic formula everyone's looking for, and nobody can fake." The contract paid 3 times what I was making in tech consulting, which felt like the universe's way of apologizing for the whole marriage falling apart thing. I signed it the same day Harper texted me to let me know she'd forwarded her mail to her parents' address. Maya became my unofficial business partner / social media guru / only Langford family member I could stand to be around. We met twice a week at various coffee shops around Denver, planning content strategies and building what she called the authenticity empire, which sounded either incredibly inspiring or deeply concerning, depending on how much caffeine I'd had. "Your engagement rate is insane," she said during one of our sessions, scrolling through analytics on her laptop while I pretended to understand what engagement rate meant. 42%. Do you know what influencers would kill for that number? You post a picture of your dog and get 8,000 likes. You post about setting boundaries with toxic family members, and people share it like it's the gospel. I feel like I should point out that I'm basically building a brand off my failed marriage and your family's dysfunction," I said. "That's kind of dark, right?" "It's only dark if you're not helping people," Maya countered. "And based on the DMs you're getting, you're helping a lot of people." You gave permission for others to speak up about being excluded and undervalued. That's powerful. She wasn't wrong. My inbox was flooded with messages from people sharing their own stories about in-laws who treated them like temporary fixtures, spouses who chose their families over their partners, and the quiet humiliation of being excluded from events you should have been invited to. Someone called me the patron saint of excluded spouses, which was either the saddest or most accurate title I'd ever received. We launched a newsletter called Didn't Fit the Aesthetic that got 15,000 subscribers in the first week. Created an online community for people dealing with toxic in-law situations. Even started a podcast, because apparently everyone has a podcast now, where I interviewed other people who'd been excluded or undervalued by their partners' families. The merchandise sales alone covered my mortgage for 3 months. Turns out, a lot of people wanted t-shirts that said, "Some reunions really are boring and too real for your aesthetic." Maya handled the fulfillment and marketing while I handled the content, and together we built something that felt more solid than my marriage ever had. My follower count hit 50,000, then 75,000. Brands wanted partnerships. Speaking opportunities rolled in. Someone from a major streaming service reached out about developing a show based on my story. Harper, meanwhile, posted a carefully curated Instagram photo of herself at her parents' house with the caption, "Finding peace in familiar places," which got maybe 200 likes and several comments from people asking if she was the wife from #Beachgate. Her attempt at image rehabilitation was failing spectacularly, while my honesty-based brand was thriving. The universe has a weird sense of humor sometimes. A month after Harper moved out, and 3 days after my lawyer sent her the separation papers, she definitely saw coming, but still acted surprised about. I did something that was either brilliantly therapeutic or deeply petty. Honestly, probably both. I booked a solo trip to the exact same beach resort where the Langfords had thrown Diane's exclusive 60th birthday bash that I wasn't aesthetic enough to attend. Maya thought it was genius. "Full circle moment," she said when I told her. "You should definitely post about it." My therapist, Dr. Chun, who I'd started seeing because apparently processing your marriage's public implosion requires professional help, was more cautious. "Are you doing this for closure or for revenge?" she asked during our Tuesday session. "Can it be both?" I replied, and she gave me that look therapists give you when they're not mad, just disappointed in your coping mechanisms. But I went anyway. Booked a room for the weekend, packed a bag that was significantly smaller than Harper's had been, and drove 3 hours to the coast with Biscuit in the passenger seat because he was the only family member who'd never betrayed me. The resort was exactly as pretentious as it looked in Lydia's Instagram photos. Valet parking, a lobby that smelled like expensive candles and rich people's cologne, and staff members who smiled like they were being paid to pretend everyone was special. I checked in under my own name, which apparently meant something now because the woman at the front desk actually recognized me. "Oh my God, are you the Beachgate guy?" she asked, her professional composure cracking into genuine excitement. "My sister sent me your post. We were dying. Her in-laws are the worst." "That's me," I said, signing the registration form and feeling that weird mix of pride and embarrassment that comes with being internet famous for having a terrible family situation. Living the dream. "She upgraded my room for free. Between you and me, you deserve it. And I ended up in an ocean view suite that probably cost more per night than my car payment." The irony of staying in luxury accommodations at the same resort where I wasn't good enough to attend a party wasn't lost on me, and I appreciated the universe's commitment to poetic justice. Saturday afternoon, I walked down to the beach. The same beach where Harper had worn that white gown and held champagne while I sat at home eating lasagna. The same beach where fairy lights had hung between palm trees and a live band had played for people who decided I wasn't worth including. It looked different now, quieter, less decorated, just a regular beach where regular people came to relax instead of a stage set for exclusionary rich people to perform their family harmony. I stood in almost the exact spot where Harper had posed in Lydia's photo. I was wearing flip-flops I'd bought at Target for $12, board shorts that had seen better days, and a t-shirt that said, "Didn't fit the aesthetic from my own merchandise line, because if you can't profit off your trauma, what's even the point?" I held up a champagne flute, plastic, from the resort's beach bar, because I'm not above being trashy when the situation calls for it, and took a selfie. The caption practically wrote itself. The beach still looks good, now that the trash took itself out. I posted it before I could overthink it, which is basically my brand now. Within minutes, the likes started rolling in. Then the comments. Then the shares. My followers, who'd grown to almost 100,000 at this point, treated it like the finale of a TV show they'd been binge-watching. King behavior. This is the closure we all needed. Harper is punching the air right now. Someone commented, the best revenge is living well, and you're thriving. They weren't wrong. In the months since Harper left, I'd tripled my income, built a community of people who actually valued authenticity over aesthetics, and discovered that I was significantly happier without the constant pressure of trying to impress people who would never be impressed. Turns out, when you stop trying to fit into spaces that don't want you, you find spaces that actually do. The post went viral. Again, because apparently my life was now a series of viral moments strung together like a very public, very messy reality show. But this time felt different. The first post had been about hurt and exclusion. This one was about reclaiming space, about refusing to let other people's rejection define my worth. 2 hours after I posted, I got a comment from Aunt Lydia. Next year's reunion might actually invite you, smiling face with smiling eyes. I stared at that comment for a solid minute, watching the little emoji smile like it was some kind of peace offering, like all the humiliation and exclusion could be erased with a casual suggestion that maybe, possibly, if I behaved myself, I might be worthy of an invitation to next year's event. I typed my reply carefully, making sure every word landed exactly how I wanted. Too late. I'm booked for peace and quiet. Then I blocked her, and Connor, and Diane, and Gerald, and every single Langford except Maya, who'd proven herself to be the only one worth keeping around. Harper texted me an hour later. Really? You're posting from the beach? I replied, yep. Unlike some people, I'm not pretending to be somewhere I'm not. She didn't respond, and I didn't expect her to. I spent the rest of the weekend walking on the beach with Biscuit, eating overpriced resort food that I could actually afford now, and not once thinking about whether I fit anyone's aesthetic. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't need Harper's family to validate me. Hell, I didn't even need Harper. The internet had already done that, with better lighting and fewer lies. Sunday evening, as I packed up to leave, I looked out at the ocean one last time. The sun was setting, painting everything in those golden hour colors that Instagram influencers kill for, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, contentment. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I'd stood up for myself, told my truth, and come out the other side as someone I actually respected. My phone buzzed with another notification. My follower count had